Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me is Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor and developer of what she calls optimal posture. And so today's topic is just to interview Deb, put the focus on her. We've been having discussions and we've talked a bit about my training methods and theory. So I really want to interview you today to understand more fully your specialty, which is human anatomy and movement. You have a background as a medical massage therapist, as well as the Alexander Technique certification. And what else? You were an anatomy teacher as well for a while, right?
I was the head instructor at the massage school in Charlottesville for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So mainly taught anatomy, but taught everything if I had to. But yeah, I did that.
Yeah, and you are my go-to when I have anatomical questions or functional questions, especially for the human body. And in knowing you all these years, sort of looking at the horse body and the human body, it's not all that different. There's some differences, but a lot of the body parts are roughly in the same place. And so, can you talk about, with your specialty really on people, you work with just people who don't ride horses, but you also specialize in working with riders and rider balance. So, what's the premise behind optimal posture? What are some of the main theories that you operate on?
Well, first off, when people hear posture, they think it's a position. They think it's a place. Where to me, it's a postural behavior. I am working with the system that creates the posture. And the basis of the system that I start with, and I think it applies with, what we talked about with what we do with horses, is looking at the head, neck, back, and pelvis. Because if they're not organized, then the arms and the legs cannot function well.
Got it. So yes, that's exactly the same premise I work on with horses, that
yes.
skull, spine, pelvic relationship as the midline of the body is critical for the overall balance or function of the entire body.
Yes.
And you do that whether somebody's a rider or not a rider.
Right. So I found a really cool word. It's called generalized ability. And that is when you can take a skill that you've learned and apply it to another task. So that's kind of what I can do. A lot of riders think that I can only help them when they're riding. But the truth is, their postural behavior is on the ground, is applied, or maybe even magnified once they get on a horse.
Yeah, because even though posture is dynamic, what you're saying is there's habits of posture that we use off the horse that we sort of tend to carry up onto the horse.
Yes. So somebody that say sits in their office chair back on their pockets, they're going to tend to do that when they get on a horse too.
Sit on the pockets.
Sit on the pockets.
Yeah, some people are instructed to do that.
That's true.
Yes.
But you can find it anywhere. And what I see is the major thing I see is we have been taught, or maybe it's just me, that I was taught as a hunter jumper rider to connect my pelvis to my legs.
What do you mean?
In my riding, whenever I ask somebody, where do you think your pelvis is, or your hips are, most people will go and put their hands on their waist and think that that's where their spine stops. So I see this total disconnect from the bottom of the spine and not attaching the pelvis to the whole entire torso. and allowing the arms and legs to hang off of that.
So in other words, my legs start where my pants start and the spine ends there.
But in reality, if you're standing, it's your spine or if you're sitting, it's the crease of your pants and the front of your pants. That's how far down the connection of, all the way down through the sacrum is, and the sacrum attaches to the pelvis. Mm-hmm. So that's all connected up to the top of the head. Yeah, so that's the biggest theory to get through with even non-riders, especially with us spending as much time sitting in an office chair.
Yes, and sitting can be challenging because we tend to collapse.
Yes.
Just like we collapse into the back of a big old saddle, we can collapse into a nice comfy chair.
Yeah.
No, and I find too that riders think of riding as a sitting position.
I totally agree. And so when we think sit, we think of a back and down motion where we collapse backwards.
Yes, where really, if you look at any good rider, there's more a sense of them standing over the horse rather than a sitting position. It doesn't look like a sitting position at all, even though our seat's in contact with the saddle. It's much more of a standing alignment through our body than sitting.
Yes. It's much more neutral, and getting our center of mass, even on the ground, for us to do any kind of emotion, we need to have our center of mass, which is kind of like right below our belly button, over our feet for proper locomotion.
No matter what we're doing.
No matter what we're doing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's the person pushing themselves out of the chair, pulling themselves up the stairs.
Yes. Yes. So I want to circle back a second. It's a different thought. Like when somebody says posture, the first thought that springs to my mind is like, the military posture or the riding posture, shoulders back, heels down, head up, all of that. So how is what you're talking about different than heels down, shoulders back, and hold your, what I would call a position?
Right. It's not a place. It is as soon as we go into movement, we're constantly moving, even if we're sitting. There's still motion going on within the body. So I work with that system that tells the body what to do. So I bring up, you could call it maybe the subconscious habits, bring them to the person's attention, and then redirect into a healthier, more natural way of using the body. For instance, probably you're going to do less of reacting to things and be able to act and make a different choice. It's all about choosing how you want to do it.
So you're saying that the posture is a changing, dynamic, flowing action, as opposed to just what we learned. Sit on your pockets, heels down, shoulders back, look where you're going. Don't move, move with the horse, hold your hand still, all of those things. Yes. Yeah, because all of those, I think that's what most people think of when you say the posture of the rider or optimal posture for riders is something that's more static rather than moving, more of a place than an action. So I like how you put posture in the category of action.
Yes. And really, I prefer to focus more on the skeleton and joints than muscle use, because we tend to overuse. We think we have to effort and it has to be a lot of work and we have to sweat.
We're going to do anyways.
If we learn to use our spine, hips, pelvis, knees, all of our joints are available, then there's much less muscular effort.
So it feels easier, feels more efficient.
I hear that a lot. It feels easier. I don't work as hard.
So do you find with riders that you work with that there are some like really common issues that riders have in common that maybe non-riders don't have in common? Like, is there something
Mm,
specific that a lot of riders do that's more indicative of what we learn when we learn to ride versus
right.
just off the horse?
Yeah. I think the major one I see is the relationship between the leg and the stirrup.
The relation, what do you mean?
So when this is the question I always ask when I get on my horses, am I using that stirrup to brace against? And am I locking all my joints all the way up from there? Or is my relationship with the stirrup just a movable piece of equipment?
Mm. So are you
Yeah. So
pushing
what?
on the stirrup or
Mhm.
are you sort of resting on the stirrup?
Exactly. And the opposite could be also, I see in a lot of hunter jumper riders, is the pulling up out of the stirrup, the excessive gripping with the thighs to stay on.
Oh, so closing the thigh is going to lift the leg.
Yeah. And it shortens everything up. And I think it also makes it much easier to fall off.
Ironically.
So, yeah, those are the things I see in riders. And I think you taught me this game, which I play with all the time, is just dropping one stirrup
Mm.
and seeing how does that dynamic, do you shift? Do you tense? So, and when those things happens, that tells me that the coordination of the head, neck, back, and pelvis is not good, because it shouldn't matter if you drop a stirrup or let go of your reins.
It
If you
shouldn't
have,
change the balance of the
right,
skull, spine, and
right,
pelvis, is what you're
right.
saying. So the
Yeah,
legs and the arms should be acting independently
exactly.
of the torso.
And we've talked about this before. The worst case scenario is the visual of the person with the walker. That is somebody that has no spinal integrity, no balance. They're balancing off of their hands and their legs. And I've seen that in riders. If you take away their reins, they can't balance. And
Mm.
that tells me somebody that really needs to focus on toning and coordination of the head, neck, back, and pelvis.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the idea of dropping one stirrup because, one of the things with riding is riding without stirrups,
Mhm.
but I don't always see that dynamically change the use of the legs at all.
Good
That
point.
I'll still see riders like gripping with the thigh and pulling upward or forcing their heel down even without stirrups. So sort of,
Right.
gripping with the leg. And that's what you're talking about as sort of a common issue with a lot of riders.
And that just boils down to we still need to focus on head, neck, back, and pelvis, getting the tone there so that the arm and legs can just hang.
So if I didn't know I was doing that with my legs because it's just a habit, it's how I was taught, heels down, close the thigh,
Mhm.
right? All of that. How would I know I'm doing that? Like how would there be signals in my body that would tell me that I'm doing that maybe unconsciously or that I'm doing it to the point that it's actually working against my balance and stability, that
Yeah,
I'm overusing my legs?
anytime we shorten and contract a muscle, this is the challenge. It shuts off the proprioceptors in that muscle to tell you where that muscle is in time and space. So there's not going to be any communication
So we
from that.
literally aren't aware of what our legs are
Yeah.
doing.
That's why you need somebody like me or just eyes on the ground to say, hey, do you realize you have to bring it to the conscious thought to make the change?
And so I guess part of my question is too, is would I experience things like leg cramps or bad knees or loose ankles, or is there any kind of body change that might alert me that I'm doing this on a regular basis, or is that unique to the individual?
I think it goes back to that. May I use your story, your knee story?
My knee story, yes.
When you were going through so much knee pain, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'll make it short, but you kept thinking, oh, I need an MRI, and I la da 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 da,
And I had a knee brace on.
And you did okay.
Mm-hmm. For like a week.
And then I worked on you, and it wasn't your knee at all. So even though you're experiencing pain there, that is like the weak link of the body, kind of like I think we've talked about with horses. The kinematics of the legs are affected by what's going on with the spine. So it's the same thing with people.
And that was the cause of my knee pain, was how I was contracting around the left side of my lumbar with a slight twist was creating excruciating pain in my right knee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say. I always, if I have any level of tension, even in my feet, I always go back to looking at how am I using my spine? Why does my foot hurt? I really need to go back to the origin of everything and check in.
And as a teenage jump rider, I remember having pain in both knees and my low back, striving harder and harder to keep the posture that I was instructed, or the riding position I was instructed to do. And it created pain in my low back and both of my knees as a teenager.
So there's that word. I love the word you use, keep or hold. That to me that tells us to shorten around that thought. So it
and use effort.
Really is we have to effort to do this. Yeah.
Yes. No, and I think that's still the most common. It's like even the words optimal posture can sort of make us think, how do I hold that position? How do I get to optimal, and how do I stay there?
Stay there.
Stay there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's also kind of how we're conditioned to think as riders, that there is a correct position that we have to maintain.
Right. I completely agree that the changing of the language or the way we receive the information of the stimulus, it's all about our choices of how we respond to the stimulus. I mean, if somebody says, have a seat, we forget that we have a choice
of how to sit,
or even I don't want to sit. That I think the only place you have to stand and sit when you're told is in a courtroom. I'm not sure. I'm thinking that's it.
Yeah.
And I've had several people, when I've chosen to not sit in a chair, to sit on the floor, they come up and say, "Are you okay? Do you hurt?" Like, no, I just chose to sit on the floor.
Well, and kind of circling back to like what you're saying is a prevalent issue with riders, that you see issues with how they use the legs. When you're working with a rider and you want to sort of help them change how they're using their legs, do you go to the legs or do you go to the core or the back?
That's a really good question. And it's probably like horses. We always, I think because we're visual, we always try to go to what we see as the problem. And if I can't unravel it there, then I'll immediately go to the back. And it's usually just helping them to understand that the pelvis goes with the torso, and connecting that and letting the legs just hang out of the sockets and fall.
That's a big deal you see across the board, is that
big deal with riders.
People are connecting the pelvis to the legs rather than connecting the pelvis to the torso and the spine in
Mhm.
their minds.
In there, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where it all begins, is in our thinking.
Oh,
Because
absolutely. I mean, my lessons with you were basically what I call experiential anatomy lessons for my own body, because it was like, okay, I could see on paper that my shoulder joint was in my back, but I still had a thought that my shoulders were attached to my sides.
wow,
And it
yeah.
changed everything when I experienced the shoulder joint in the scapula in my back. And the same
Mhm.
thing with the hip joint, that it's not up at the top of our waistline or on the side, that the hip joint's actually towards the front of the pelvis, and
Mhm.
it's way down where our pants crease when we get in the saddle,
Yeah,
below the zipper.
yeah.
And that's
So
where our legs actually start, is that low.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And I mean, our seat bones, the ischium, are really just two little tiny points
Mhm.
that we're trying to balance this huge torso over two little unstable points. So, of course, it would be dynamic because there's no way to stick those seat bones in place on a moving horse.
Right. Especially on moving. If we try to keep them, I'm going to use the word still, but that's probably not a good word. Then we tend to stiffen around it. But if we think we have to effort and shorten and contract, then we get more motion because we're moving against what our bodies can do.
Right. We're trying to just not move against a moving force.
Exactly.
Yeah, that'll get you launched off the boat. Yeah. Yeah, because we would never do that in a canoe or a kayak or even a sailboat on the ocean. You would never think heels down, shoulders back, stay still, because it would just, you'd get cast overboard in a heartbeat with one wave. And so,
Exactly.
yes. So, like a sailor's posture is a good image to think of posture as a dynamic, ever
Yeah.
changing action.
Or a surfer. I like the surfer. Or
Mhm.
another one I really like, I don't know if you agree, is a jockey. I mean, the dynamics
Oh, absolutely.
of the way, if you watch a race and see how well organized that jockey is from the top of their head to their butt,
Yes.
but everything else is moving.
Yeah, and the only leg contact a jockey has is literally between the ankle and the heel.
Yeah.
Like
So
that's it. There is no leg contact. So how do
right.
they stay up there?
It,
And a jockey is like, it's so interesting to me. If you look at good jockeys on racing horses from sort of a distance, they look like these still little motionless peas on top of a galloping horse. They look motionless from a distance.
exactly.
And then when you get up close, you see just how far their arms are stretching forward and back, and just how much the hip, knee, and ankle joint are flexing and extending. So the legs are bouncing up and down, and the arms are moving forward and back. But from the head to the tailbone, even though it's at a little bit of an angle to gravity, it's still straight internally. There's that
Yes.
integrity of alignment and control from head to seat bones.
Yes.
Even though the seat
Yeah.
bones are up over the back of the saddle
Mm-hmm.
and sort of going out the back door, and the shoulders are going out the front door, it's like that use of the body is a really great exaggeration of balance over a lot of force.
A lot of yeah. Yeah.
And in the gallop, you have as much force going up and down from the horse as you have lengthening and shortening during the strides of a gallop. So there's sort of this big elastic pull or stretch forward and back in the horse's motion, but there's also a lot of force sort of going up and down in the motion as
Yes.
well, vertical force. And so
Yeah.
that's how our bodies cope with it. And I love watching a good jockey. Like it's just beautiful to
Yes.
watch how they move in time with the horse. And it's
So
certainly not static. It's a great
it's
example.
mhm. Yeah. That's the best example I think horse people would relate to,
Mm,
is seeing that that integrity, like that word you used, of the whole spine all the way down through the pelvis, but all the other joints are moving.
Yeah, because the joints are the shock absorbers of the body.
Exactly.
And so if you lock them, you have no shock absorbers. It's like bang, 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 bang.
It's like the wagging ponytail in the trot.
Yeah. Well, that would be somebody using the joints of the spine instead of the joints of the limbs.
Exactly.
To absorb the shock.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when we do that, I think we work much harder than if we reverse that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time I get on, I'm constantly saying to myself, are all my joints open and available? Are they available? If I needed to jump off right now, would I be able to do it?
And that's a good, it was kind of my next question is, you know, how is what you're communicating here, how is optimal posture, which is a dynamic action for the rider, how is that useful? Why is that useful? Why would we even want to work on it as riders? What are the benefits?
Less muscular tension, less muscular efforting. I have been told by some trainers that those students who take Alexander lessons, it's much easier for them to communicate what's going on with their body. So you are more consciously aware of maybe not only your own body, but where the horse is putting you. Because like I said, if you unlock and not use tension, all those proprioceptors are open and available to send information to where you are in time and space.
So it makes you a better rider or a safer rider, more effective rider? What would you say?
All of that, more intuitive, more, because we've often talked with, we either affect our horses in a positive way or not. So I think if we are more attuned to our own balance and use, then the horse has a much easier time balancing himself.
Yes, because I think we forget we are weight and mass.
Yes.
On the horse. Yes. And so what you're saying is in this dynamic action of finding the right posture over and over, that we make the horse's job easier.
Yes.
Okay.
I would say, and you can disagree with me, I would say 90% of the equation between horse and rider is the rider and
The rider
how they're
balance.
using their body.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to developing a horse, I would say 90%. When we enter the relationship, I would say we both come into it with our own set of issues, about 50-50. Because a horse is an individual and they have their own body management issues or habits of movement or things that are instinctual versus things that are beyond instinct that they have to be trained to do to find strength and self-carriage and stability with the weight and mass of a rider on board. That's not natural to them. So I would say horses have their own set of issues that to me, it's like the rider is sort of the Alexander technique instructor for the horse. So
well, let's hope they are.
Well,
unless they're sitting on their pockets.
Yeah. So if the rider knows how to organize their own body and has some self-control, even if the horse isn't moving correctly, then our aids or techniques or maneuvers can become more effective because we're communicating to the horse more balance in everything we do because we have more self-control and we're more efficient.
I think that's the critical. We have more self-control. We become more efficient so that we don't become such a management issue for the horse.
Right. No, and really the path of least resistance for the horse, if you look at their structure, this sort of table of a body. You've got a long, a long rectangular table with 4 legs, but then you're sticking this long neck out the front of the table with a heavy weight on the end. So just that, they have to learn to manage themselves. But then if you put the weight of a rider on, it sort of tips the scales a little bit so that gravity is really pulling a horse forward and down with a rider. And so if the rider succumbs to that on a horse, then we do kind of make their balance worse. We make their job harder. But if we, like with the work you do, if we even just start to learn how to manage ourselves on the constant changing forces of motion that is the horse, we have a much better influence over their movement. We can start to counteract or counterbalance where they lose balance.
Yes.
So just like if a wave hits your canoe, right? If it hits your canoe from the left, it's going to send you over to the right. But if you don't want the canoe to tip, you add a little extra body weight to the left and resist the wave. And that to me is sort of what we can learn to do on a horse to help the horse develop balance if we can maintain our own. Because if that wave hits and it sends you to the right side of the boat, you're history. It's like capsize, right?
Yes.
So as soon as we add our weight to the problem, and the horses don't fall over as fast as a boat, you know, or depending on the structure of the boat, but it still creates a lot of problems. It creates a lot of force in the wrong places in the body and can lead to soreness, discomfort, even lameness.
And personality or those kind of issues can come up from it.
Yeah. Like they might complain and tell us something is wrong for a long time before we get it.
Complain.
Yeah. They will complain, or they'll, even if the complaining doesn't work and we don't hear them, they'll start to act more and more defensively against us. And then we call them naughty. But they're really just defending themselves from us sometimes.
Yes.
So is there anything simple that you could kind of give riders something to play with, to think about, or to do the next time they ride after listening to this podcast? Is there something you can think of?
The thing about the stirrups is real entertaining, is dropping one stirrup and see what, there's no right or wrong. It's just being curious enough to explore, well, what happens when I do that?
What does this leg feel like in the stirrup compared to this leg that's out of the stirrup?
Or do I tense with the other side to hold me on? When I drop that stirrup, that tells me that the pelvis is connected to the legs.
Oh, interesting. So if I drop my right stirrup and I end up sort of lifting and tensing my whole left side, then I might have mentally connected my pelvis to my legs because I'm being pulled down.
Exactly.
Got it. And
so the other one that I find fascinating, but it can be a safety issue, maybe practice on a pony, is this really gets into our habits of riding, is mounting from what we consider the offside.
No, and that can be done on a horse.
Yeah. If you feel safe, it's a safe horse and all that. But I laugh every time because I have to stop and pause and think about it.
Yeah.
And reorganize myself. Whereas the habit is getting on the left side, and you just do it. You don't think about it.
Right. No, and sometimes to just wake up our awareness, I will have riders mount from the offside because there's no real reason not to. And a lot of chiropractors and body workers will say it's better for the horse if you alternate which side you mount from.
That's a good point.
And it's good for our skills of being more ambidextrous and not just one-sided. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen people just automatically put the wrong foot in the stirrup.
Oh, when you're getting on the offside?
Yeah. Yes. So it's like when we mount typically from the horse's left side, we stick our left foot in the stirrup in order to get ready to mount. And so when people are on the right side of the horse, most people, I want to say a large majority of people, will stick their left foot in the stirrup and then have to kind of think about it for a second and go, oh, wait, that's not going to work. I'll land backwards facing the tail, right?
And the most important, the two pieces that I think are important about either of those exercises is to pause and listen and be curious enough to, say, wow, okay, didn't realize I did that.
So mounting from both sides and dropping one stirrup at a time when you ride. So when you drop one stirrup at a time, what are you looking for? Like how would people make an improvement to their riding based on what they find? What would be something people could use to improve the use of their legs?
Give a suggestion. I normally say just to bring your belly button and your pubic bone closer together. So you could do that right now, just however you do that, and do that before you move your leg and see what happens. Just to tone up, to connect your pelvis to your torso so that your pelvis doesn't rock when you drop a stirrup.
So finding sort of the core muscles, lower abdominal muscles, thinking about your pelvis being part of your spine as you drop one leg.
Yes. And even when you're picking that stirrup back up. Are you hiking your hip to do it and moving your whole body sideways to
get up your stirrup?
Yeah, that is a very good test also. Can I maintain stability in my spine and pelvis and move my leg back into the stirrup without tipping my pelvis? Yeah.
Yes. Another thing I find interesting is sometimes when I notice riders overuse their legs and don't have enough stability in their torso, I'll have them drop one stirrup for 3 to 5 minutes and then pick it up and then drop the other stirrup for about 3 to 5 minutes and then play between dropping both stirrups and picking them back up. And after about 10 or 15 minutes of just exploring how the leg could hang from the hip joint, what's really interesting is most people will want to take their stirrups down a hole or two after that.
Yeah, I like to call that unwinding of all of that muscle tension in the leg. That we thought we needed to use muscular effort and contraction to hold that leg up, when in reality,
that's what makes the rider want the stirrup shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yes.
Is because everything is pulling upward. And then, sort of playing with what could my leg feel like while I'm balanced on my seat bones, or while my pelvis is connected to my torso and not my legs. Yeah, I find that just letting gravity sort of pull on the rider's leg has the effect of making the legs feel longer. And all of a sudden, the normal stirrup length feels too short.
And the reason that unwinding is going on is because if we are connecting the pelvis to the legs, we're normally using that very large psoas muscle to maintain the pelvis, which is not the appropriate muscle to do that with. And that causes that shortening, wanting more support with shorter stirrups, or sitting at your desk and holding your feet off the ground. That's the psoas kicking in, instead of going, oh, I need to tone and allow my legs to just fall out of my pelvis. I need to tone my abdominals a little bit.
Which will help relax the legs.
Yeah, and then the psoas, it's just a safety measure that the body does, is if you don't have the right tone to support your spine, your psoas is about as big around as your fist. It's going to take over if you don't have that coordination in your head it's going to take over and shorten the legs. And it also causes the arching of the low back. So if you see riders, like you were mentioning, when you were a jump rider,
Oh,
your low
yes.
back would always hurt. So I'm wondering if you were taught that wonderful position,
Oh, yeah, because how do you get your seat back when you're up out of the saddle in 2-point? How could you possibly get your seat back and your shoulders back
Exactly.
and look up at the jump without arching your back? I just, nobody instructed. It was a lot of riding instruction is based on what you do with your limbs more so than what you're
Right.
doing with your head, spine, and pelvis.
I agree.
Yeah, and I'll see very good riders, very advanced riders that are really obviously dependent on the limbs and have no stability through the torso
Hmm.
and are completely unaware of it because that's just how they ride. That's what they got used to.
And we ride along with that habit usually until we have, like you did, a pain occurrence, like, oh,
Or
there's
we have a horse
information.
that bucks us off regularly and we rethink, we have to rethink how we're doing things.
Ding, ding,
Yes.
ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Great. So that gives people a little something to try, mounting from both sides and kind
And
of
dismounting, that
and
too. I mean,
dismounting from both
either
sides
one, both.
safely.
Safely,
Yes.
it has to. And be aware that if you are not organized through your head, neck, back, and pelvis, your central nervous system may send you a warning signal.
And what would that be?
Well, it could be anything. It could be a reaction, a reflex of going into startle,
A moment of panic?
a moment of oh.
Yeah.
And fear could come up. It's the same thing, the same concept as somebody that has gotten to the point they have to use a walker. And so the central nervous system is sending all these messages saying you are not balanced, your spine isn't balanced. So then it sends up the fear indicator. I'm going to fall if you don't fix this.
And so people tense harder.
And people tense more
Yeah.
instead of pausing, taking a breath and going, oh, okay, I hear you. Let me see if I can reorganize myself.
All right.
Not have that come up.
So just to summarize real quickly, I think what I really took away from this was posture. We have to think of posture as an action, as an activity, rather than a static position. That posture is dynamic and constantly sort of adjusting, especially on a horse or a boat or any moving force, right? And that the primary theory you're talking about is stabilizing in a moving dynamic way, finding stability over and over of the skull, the spine, and the pelvis.
Yes.
In alignment to like in an internal sensation, or is there any external point of reference?
It's pretty much internal because most of your postural muscles are right against the bone. Like your biceps and your triceps, they're not posture. They don't regulate any type of posture. So it's everything internal, the deep muscles right next to the spine. Those are the muscles that create the postural tone to support the head, neck, back, and pelvis.
Great. And so if we're over efforting through our limbs, our arms and legs, then that can alert us that we either have a slight misalignment or a misuse or not enough stability through the skull, spine, and pelvis.
Yeah, that means we're using some sort of tenseness, a holding pattern to create stability.
Great. And that a really common thing you see with a lot of riders is this sort of mentally thinking of our pelvis as part of our legs, because that's where our pants start at the waistline, rather than really thinking of our our seat, sort of the seat bones at the base of the pelvis, all the way up the spine, through the torso, up into the skull.
Yeah, that
And
should all be one connected. And I think we've had conversations of that is the seat all the way up from your head down to your sit bones is your seat.
mm,
I like to
yes,
think of it that way. That is an no giveaway to the horse. You know, I don't give that to the horse.
yeah,
I can maybe like a jockey, I can give a lot with my arms and I can give a lot with movement in my joints and my legs, but not in my torso.
not through the spine.
Right.
Got it. And so that sort of internal stability through our spine, including the pelvis, and remembering that our legs are attached near the front of the pelvis, not the
They are
sides.
very much so.
And that our legs start sort of below the zipper of our pants and not at the top of the zipper of our pants,
Right.
but closer to the bottom of the zipper.
Yeah.
So kind of finding that, I guess, in a way, being able to disconnect our legs from our pelvis and our spine,
Yes.
and connect the pelvis, spine, and head as a single unit where we really get our balance from there, not from the arms and legs.
Exactly. Because if you think of it, the spine houses the central nervous system. That's, you know, Grand Central Station to get communication from the brain to the body. So if that is not in a neutral, stable place, something is going to tense up.
Great. And then a little practical tip for the riders is mount from both sides and play with dropping one stirrup at a time, just comparing what does this leg feel like compared to that leg in the stirrup, and switch back and forth. And then
Yeah.
as you're doing that, sort of watch, does my pelvis go with my legs?
Mhm.
Or does my pelvis stay still as I use my legs to go, put my foot in and out of the stirrup?
Or do I have to lean to one side to get my foot back in the stirrup?
Yeah, that would be connecting the pelvis to the legs.
That would definitely be doing that. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing all that, Deb. You are awesome with anatomy and human balance, and I'm so glad you're working with riders. I'm sure it's
I'm
a
so glad I'm working with
huge help.
you.
And me too. I love working with you too. That's why we meet all the time.
We do.
All right. So thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast. We look forward to seeing you again. Please like, share, subscribe, make comments. We love the comments. And we hope to see you back here again. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.